So welcome. I'm Adam with Share Capital Cooperative, and I'm here with founding members of the Drivers Co-op in New York City, Alissa Orlando, Ken Lewis, and Erik Forman. Welcome, and I'd like to start with just asking the three of you as founding members of this really important co-op, what was your thought process? How did you come together on this, and where do you think it's going?
The idea of a drivers co-op is not totally new, in the sense that the drivers in the industry, especially following the introduction of rideshare and Uber and Lyft in particular, post 2012, have been always looking at ways to do a better job, at ways they can stop the declining income and the increase in costs from rideshare. And so one of the ideas was always to, how can we do our own app? But when Erik Forman put together a group of drivers to look at ways in which drivers can save by by having a united power, that's where that was one of the main ideas. Why can't we do our own app? And it's out of this at the end of 2019 that this idea started to become reality.
And I was introduced to Ken and Erik through a few lawyers in the cooperative movement, because when Prop 22 was happening in California, I said, this is too much. And seeing that the platform's response to the pandemic around charging drivers for PPE, trying to minimize the amount that they would have to pay in paid leave, shifting billions of dollars in unemployment costs onto taxpayers for systems that they don't pay into. I said, I've gotten the training from these platforms on how to run a ride hailing company through my tenure as head of operations for Uber in East Africa, but I don't want to do it for venture capitalists. I want to do it with and on behalf of the folks who are actually making these platforms run, which is the drivers.
Through one thing that Shared Capital is trying to think through how to do is how to use the resources that it has to advance racial equity. I think that I had sort of similar questions for myself when I found myself as a union staffer in a labor nonprofit that was organizing Uber and Lyft drivers in New York. I try to figure out, how do I use that position to create space for drivers to get more control over their own lives and get the things they want. And the number one thing that I was hearing drivers say they wanted was to own the platform.
So just kind of looking at some of the data you all pulled up, 91% of drivers in New York City are immigrants. 70% of them don't have $1,000 in savings. And then you compare that to the outrageous pricing to get a taxi medallion, which used to be a great, used to be kind of your pathway to employment.
This industry did for a time. There was kind of a golden age where driving a cab was a stable working class job, where you could put kids through college, where you could maybe even buy a house. That was the 1960s or 1950s and 1960s, when it was also heavily unionized. There was a powerful union that represented taxi drivers during that time. The bottom fell out of the working conditions when it went from being mostly white workforce to mostly workers of color, which happened from 1965 until the late 70s, and then really from 1979 until present.
Taxi was always a way to get into the American middle class. Taxi drivers were able to buy houses, they were able to send children into school, up to university level, and that generation became better. This has not been happening in the recent disposition of this industry, both in terms of the decimation of yellow cabs, and with it simultaneously the coming in of rideshare, which, as you know, is extremely exploitative to workers. Workers have to buy this expensive car, which many times is $25,000 and above, and so much of your ratings is based on this car. So you try to get the best car you can. And so that, plus all the costs, the insurance, everything is put on the driver. And I have known cases where drivers have had to download from apartments to actually live in rooms together. So one would sleep in the day, one would sleep in the night. In some cases, they have had to send families back home into Bangladesh and Yemen and countries. I'm like, it has been brutal on people.
10 years ago, when they were entering the market, rides were free for consumers and pay was extremely high for drivers, which led to these multi-year debt commitments that drivers were making under like a very rational assumption, right? This pays me more, so of course I'm going to. What wasn't communicated is that those were short-term tactics to get market share, and things were not going to stay that way. One of our driver members, Walter, popped in and said, look, like even without riders, the cooperative has added huge value in the fact that I used to be paying $1,900 a month for my vehicle loan. I'm now a member of the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union. I now pay $500 a month. And so that's a $1,400 a month savings that came just from attending one of our orientations and connecting him with one of our partners.
When I contacted him afterwards and saying, this is great, he was like, there are many drivers and this happened to, it's not just me.
Wow.
You know, we're sending off a bunch of marketing materials to the printers. Like, could we have afforded that? No, you know, like we had to legally register as a base in order to operate. Could we have afforded that? No, you know, there's these like very non-glamorous expenses that are required to execute this very glamorous dream. And that's exactly what shared capital has enabled.